You talking about football?
Yeah, Town, NFC North. Then let's talk football.
Welcome in, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast hosted by me, D-Tron. This week, we are reflecting back on last week and thinking how wrong could we have been? Or maybe how right we could have been. Last week, I sat in this chair and I talked about Jalen Carter potentially being the Bears' focus. That's probably changed. We weren't talking at all about Nolan Smith coming out of Georgia, and after the combines, that's going to change. We talked about Kirk Cousins possibly leaving the North and dropping Lamar Jackson into Minnesota, and clearly no one believed that that's going to happen. But now, Kirk's due $20 million coming up mid-month, and Lamar Jackson's free to talk to anybody, so could this be happening? Probably not. The Lions got a quarterback that they care about, but could they still be drafting for the future? And did Gonzalez just make himself a top cornerback to go after coming out of this combine? There's a lot of stuff to talk about this week. And also, Aaron Rodgers. Look, I sat here last week asking if it were possible that Aaron Rodgers would not be in a Green Bay jersey and how much joy it would bring me if that were the case. Then he woke up, came out of hibernation, and started taking meetings with the Jets. Yeah, this is going to be a good week. Even though the football season is not in right now, there's a whole lot going on in the North, so make sure you got your bag packed, because after this advertising break, we're going to get into it all. For the next 15, 30, or 60 seconds, you could be hearing an ad about your product or your service going out to the ears of all of my listeners. But unfortunately, you haven't sent us an email inquiring about running ads on Headed North. But that's okay. You still got plenty of time. Head down to the show notes, get our email, shoot us an email, and let us know how we can fill an advertising void if you've got customers that you want to reach in the Midwest that care about football, because that's what we do here. All right, let's get into the headlines. Coming out of last week, the focus was how the Bears could trade down with some teams and go and still acquire Jalen Carter. Now, if you didn't see the breaking news, there were some situations in his personal life that will definitely have an impact on where he gets drafted. Now, the Chicago Bears are probably out on him because that's a big risk to take with someone when you are unsure about what their current status is going to be and availability to play. But they still got a ton of leverage. The Chicago Bears can still get, a small fortune for their first round draft pick, even though the combines really showed that there's multiple quarterbacks that you could likely start a franchise with. So if you are, I think I mentioned the Colts last week. If you're the Colts, you don't have to go and get that number one pick. And if you do, you don't have to give up everything to get it now, because Will Levis is out there. You got CJ Stroud still, Bryce Young, and then Anthony Richardson out of Florida really came out of the combines looking good. So Indy is not that far away from potentially being able to go and get one of these quarterbacks if they fall. What I think is going to be important is, who do you want to build your franchise around? Because that's who's going to be willing to give the Bears everything they're looking for, which is probably going to be some kind of star receiver. It has to be a pick in the top 10, because why trade down that far when you still want to go out and get some talent? And it kind of opens up a lot of folks for the Chicago Bears. If they're willing to go and get Will Anderson Jr., they could potentially go and get someone like Nolan Smith out of Georgia, which I mentioned. Someone, again, who can be a pillar on their defense. These are the book is wide open for Chicago Bears. So I'm not going to speculate much more, because clearly when I speculate about who they're going to take and who they might trade with, that picture can completely change in a week. What I can tell you is Justin Fields isn't going anywhere, and they're probably not taking Jalen Carter because there's now some risk. I can't wait any longer to talk about Aaron Rodgers. You're probably sick of this. And honestly, I'm sick of talking about it. But Aaron Rodgers is important to the makeup of this division, because when he leaves, fingers crossed that he's gonna leave, he's going to be leaving a significant hole for one of the teams that have been dominant. Now, I am firmly in the camp of Jordan Love. while I haven't seen Jordan Love play a ton of ball, there's clearly some folks out there in the NFL sphere that believe Jordan Love is a top talent. I mean, Green Bay has to believe that he's a top talent. They moved up to get him in the 2020 draft. So they got to believe that there's something there. I just think that they're over Aaron Rodgers, and hopefully this conversation that Aaron Rodgers has had with the New York Jets will turn into a situation where he takes off. Like, I really want Aaron Rodgers to go. I appreciate how great he has been, but also I don't like him because I have to see him twice a year. It isn't fun. And he's a bit of a diva, but most people already know that. So I'm just saying, get Aaron Rodgers out of Green Bay. They probably should have traded Aaron last year because now the team that gets him are going to have to take on that contract. But, the Jets would be willing to do that because what's their alternative? Zach Wilson? Nobody wants to go another season watching Zach Wilson throw the ball into the dirt. One thing I found interesting in the news recently about the Detroit Lions is that they went and added someone to their staff. Someone that they're pretty familiar with as an organization. The Detroit Lions, although losing a couple of pieces, including Deuce Staley and some other folks from the coaching staff, went and picked up John Fox, former head coach of, you got it, the Chicago Bears, among other teams, to be a senior defensive assistant. You already have Aaron Glenn, who started last year pretty shaky. They kind of picked it up, and now adding John Fox, someone who has head coaching experience, can certainly be an additional piece to the Lions defense, which needs a ton of help. And speaking of a ton of help, Gonzalez looked pretty good in the combines. There was a quote from Dan Campbell mentioning that, he's not really a huge fan of scouting guys at the combine, watching them in their pajamas, I think is what he said, run drills. That's not really where you find out who they are. Watching tape is where you find out who they are. Well, on tape, Gonzalez looks pretty good. And then he followed it up with a combine that looked pretty good as well. I don't want us to get too excited on this kid because I don't want us to go and get him at 6, because I don't think you should be drafting a cornerback at 6. I think you should be going after another defensive lineman, someone who could really be an additional staple on that defensive line. Dan Campbell has a point. What they do at the combines, where because you can jump high, because you can broad jump, because you can run fast, doesn't mean it's going to translate into the NFL. It just doesn't. I like one of the quotes that Dan Campbell had about John Fox, though, is that I think he's going to be great at helping Aaron Glenn just watching his blind spots. Look, you knew at the beginning of the season Aaron Glenn was getting a bit blitz happy, right? All of these zero coverage blitz, and we got burned pretty early in the season on it. So hopefully John Fox is going to be able to step into a role that can maybe tap Aaron on the shoulder and say, hey, probably not the move right now. Hey, let's play some more traditional defense. Hey, let's get better at the D-back position. Because these are all the kinds of direction that someone needed to help Aaron Glenn with maybe earlier in last season. And hopefully he's already got a latch on it now. But you can't hurt adding that kind of experience to your defense for sure. And last, but certainly not least, Kirk Cousins. I was just joking last week about getting Lamar Jackson into Minnesota. By joking, I mean I didn't believe that there was ever a possibility that he could land there, largely because of the money just being too much for them to want to pony up, but also because I felt like Kirk Cousins might have had a pretty solid position with the organization. But as most of you have probably already been aware of, Kirk Cousins is like the definition of average. He is the midline. There's like the above Kurt and the below Kurt. And he's firmly in the middle. I don't know if you have to give him the kind of money that you're going to need to give him, which I think he's got like a $20 million bonus coming up here mid-March, for him to get you the kind of production that you could probably get from Jameis Winston or, even Andy Dalton at this point. Now, granted, Minnesota's not in rebuild mode. So I'm not telling you to go and get rid of all of your star pieces. I'm just saying that the kind of production that Kirk Cousins gives you is not necessarily the kind of production that you need to hold on to him as a critical piece of your franchise. I'm just saying that he could be replaced. Jimmy G's probably not coming to Minnesota, but that's also not really who you're looking for. Minnesota could even try to move up in the draft to get someone like an Anthony Richardson or Will Levis and probably get the same kind of production in first year that Kirk Cousins is going to give you. Sure, he's got experience. He's won some games, and I don't discount that. But I would take a flyer on someone who is new versus the average that I know. Lamar's not coming, but he could because they have franchise tagged him with the weird tag, the one that allows him to have interviews or conversations with other teams. And those other teams would have to give up 2 first-round draft picks for Lamar. Minnesota, I mean, I don't think they have the ability to go and get him financially, but if they could, he would make their team certainly more dynamic. He is, 2 or 3 years removed from being the league MVP? You can't tell me that he's not going to make that franchise better, but will they pay him the money? And speaking of money, as we get around the league, there's some people who are getting some big contracts this week. You had Derek Carr go down to New Orleans and get 4 years, $150 million. I think 100 of it is guaranteed. You had Daniel Jones just get a big contract where he's getting like 44 or 45 million a year. Daniel Jones and Derek Carr are not nearly as good as Lamar Jackson. There's got to be a team out there who would be willing to bring him on. And heck, I don't see the Lions doing it, and I don't see Chicago doing it, but would Green Bay's too stingy. They're not going to pay him. I guess they're not stingy. They do spend a lot of money on their offense, specifically quarterback. But again, you got Aaron Rodgers. But Minnesota could pull this off. I'm now convincing myself that Minnesota could get Lamar Jackson. Let's make this thing happen. And actually, no, I'm a Lions fan. Don't bring him to the division. I don't need that. I don't need that in my life. You see what Justin Fields did to us last year on the ground. I don't need to see Lamar Jackson do that. That'd be 4 games out of the year. That'd just be tough. I don't want that. But quarterbacks are getting some big contracts in free agency. There's still several quarterbacks out there who we are keeping an eye on, including Mr. Rodgers, but also Jimmy Garoppolo and anyone who potentially gets traded out of their organization. Kirk Cousins. Look, that's it. It's a short show this week. I just wanted to get on here and vent some of my thoughts about the organizations. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I am your host, D-Tron. This would be the time that you should go and click the subscribe button. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you for tuning in. If you are listening to us on your favorite audio platforms like, I don't know, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, thank you for listening. Definitely hit that follow or subscribe button. And I'll talk to you guys next week. Peace. You talking about football?
Yeah, Football NFC North. Now let's talk football.